How you doing, everybody? Welcome back. It's going to be a great day. How you feeling today, Jay?
I'm feeling fantastic. We got a great guest on today.
We do have a great guest on today. He's a little bit of everything. He's a fellow podcaster. He's a private investigator, former MUFON field investigator. He's the president of the Experiencers Support Association. Interesting idea. This is a group that helps people deal with potential PTSD from unexplained phenomena. I mean, there's not a whole lot of resources where people can discuss what happened, at least without fearing of, being judged or looking vulnerable or telling a close friend who's now maybe not going to look at you the same way anymore. So very valuable resource. We got into a lot of topics. We discussed the paranormal, mysticism, but from a nuts and bolts mindset, if there is such a thing. So I'm super excited to present our episode today. Mr. Ryan Stacy was a great guest, and we'll be right back. And let's get right into it.
Let's do this.
Welcome back, everybody, to another great episode, UAP Studies Podcast. I am Louis Borges. Joining me, as always, my good friend and illustrious co-host, Mr. Jason Gilmet. How are you?
I'm good, brother. I'm really excited about today's guest. We've been looking forward to this interview for a while now.
Yeah, we have a fellow Canadian. Most of our guests are American, or in Jacques Vallée's case, from France and, Australia and all around the world. So good to have some hometown blood on the show with us today, and a proper mind on the subject. We have a private investigator, a fellow podcaster, a citizen journalist, president of TESA, which is the Experiencer Support Association, providing resources and information on people who are dealing with experiences, paranormal, extraterrestrial, and also for people who are just interested in the field and what it might be about. It's a very good resource as well. So we want to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Ryan Stacy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So explain a little bit about sort of your life prior to what you're doing now, what got you interested in these topics. And before the show, we were chatting a bit, and I heard you mention that you were able to create the job that you wanted for yourself, which is something that 1,000,001 self-help books tell you how to do. So elaborate a little bit on what that journey was like for you.
All right. So, well, I've always been a paranormal investigator. That's kind of where it started. In terms of the hobby, I got into investigations around 2005 professionally, and I always had that paranormal interest. While I was kind of building the business or whatnot. I started my company in 2015 as a private investigating company. It's also private security, but along the ways, I had different names and titles to call this paranormal group that I had. I used to do the stuff that you would see on TV, because that was kind of the way I thought it was supposed to be, and that's kind of what everybody else was doing. And along the way, I got caught up with a bug called MUFON, and I spent a good 3 to 5 years. I can't remember. 2015 is when I got in. I can't remember when I got out. It's kind of like service to the military. So I spent some time there, moved up the ranks in the investigative side. So eventually I became the chief investigator for MUFON Canada. And then I assisted MUFON National, being the field investigator trainer. So I was responsible for revamping the curriculum for the MUFON University, and teach field investigators how to investigate, things that we can't find, unidentified flying objects, now UAP. So alongside running a private investigating company and in a security business. So to get to where I am now was a long, hard work of, moving things and selling the business and doing all these other things, building a good team that's able to run the company to make me free where I am now. So as a CEO, I could be relaxing, I should be relaxing, but now I'm doing this full time, because this is what I now want to do. I feel like I have to do because of the time I invested, especially with MUFON, to the people, because as I evolve and learn through the people, there is something going on. I do have these skills that can be applied to the human being sense, so that bedside manner, and I just so happen to fall into it And now I've created a second business, which is the Experiencer Support Association, which is actually a media company, and which is responsible for assisting people like myself who struggle to get into, the limelight, I guess, if you will, on this subject. And now, so we now have resources that kind of help create content as well, but focused around creating support mechanisms for those who are affected by the phenomenon. So while I'm also pushing disclosure here in Canada behind the scenes, helping a few people as well. I won't mention any names for now because the work's kind of developing, but while I'm helping with that, it helps me understand the human element. So I investigate all things. So which I call the ultra spectrum. So paranormal, cryptid, UFOs, and trying to connect it all together. And essentially where I'm at now is trying to prepare for what happens after disclosure. So, or after confirmation, I should say. Disclosure, in my opinion, has already happened. We're just waiting for that confession or that validation that what we believe is going on has happened. So now I'm focusing on what happens next, because a lot of people are pushing to get that confirmation, but not realizing, or I hope they realize, but I don't see the focus, too much focus on how the human population is going to be affected by that. So those, we have those skeptics, we have those who don't believe, we have those who are trying to debunk and trying to do all these things to get the truth, which is balance everything. And being in the middle as an investigator, it's hard because I got to balance this. And in order to balance it, I always end up with human being the source. So the challenges that I have is when you get into the abduction phenomenon, where you have sexual abuse, you have injuries, so assault, you have like all these criminal offenses that that occur. When we find out that UFOs or UAPs exist, there's that inclination or that implied thought that those exist as well. And so we need to, there has to be something to prepare the people. Now, I do put I put some trust in the government, we'll just say that, to balance it, to have that belief, to think that even though they haven't told us everything, they told us enough. And when we need to know. So there may be resources that could come out available with that package if we decide to say, hey, these things exist. Because if you say yes to one, you're going to say yes to everything. So there's a lot that's going to go into it. At the same time, if they don't say anything at all, we kind of still have to focus on the people, because there is something happening. And that's where I get into consciousness and all that other stuff too. So that's where I was. That's where I am. Questions?
You mentioned the disclosure versus confirmation. We were on Dave Scott's Spaced Out Radio the other night, and that's one of the questions he asked us. And he says, what's the difference and what are your thoughts? And I said, well, from my opinion, disclosure is important for those people who need the validation of their career. Like George Knapp, he spent 35 years doing this. You want that to officially come out, just to be able to tell all your naysayers, this is real, I told you so. Yeah. And validation is more, I think, for people who were skeptic and didn't really have any good proof. And that's a big problem with ufology, is the lack of physical evidence that we can all agree on. You know what I mean? So
that's a very important to acknowledge, because where I'm at in terms of this movement, well, at least where I feel like I'm inadvertently competing with what was already there, because I have a different view, and I'm working on a new system for a future. I have a future vision, whether we have disclosure or not. I'm moving past that, and whatever happens, I'll apply that. But my assessment on the steps that have been taking place does not appear to me as if disclosure is going to happen or confirmation is going to happen. It just kind of appears as if they're going to contain it and normalize it, so we stop worrying about it and then we kind of move on. The fear with that is when you have, like here in Canada, we got Grant Cameron and Chris Rutowski. Those two have been trying to get answers for a very, very long time, longer than I have, of course. And if we don't get an answer, then their life's work was for nothing in terms, not for nothing, but I mean that they don't get that validation.
Yeah.
So a lot of these people are fighting now because it's so close in their lifetime.
Yeah.
But you put on the PI hat, the risk analysis hat, and look at things and understand how things are moving on a balance of probabilities. I don't think we're going to get that, but that's might be a generational thing as well. We're getting close though.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Canadian media's angle on all of this? Like, we haven't really seen anything really solid. Like, I know CNN and stuff like that in the States are covering the subject, but it seems like Canada, we're always behind the times, and we don't want to seem silly. So what do you think about the media right now? Does it need to cover the subject a lot more?
Yeah, it is. Does it need to? Well, it depends on the opinion of it. Like, we're liberal right now, but there's conservatives right now that's pushing the narrative. So my assessment on that essentially is like, I don't know enough about it, whether or not they're just pushing it so they can help their election to get information in, if they can, do all these other things. But like, Canada's always been piggybacking off of news. All the news gets piggybacked. When you go to high school and things like that too, you learn about American history before you learn about Canadian history.
That's so true.
So does it need to happen in terms of a cultural sense? Sure, why not? Does it have to happen? I like Canada's kind of perspective in that sense, because it's nothing. It's not important. It's like, it's a machine. We have it, kind of sense. Like, don't worry about it. We're safe. Let's move on. The thing is, though, is there are people pressing for answers. So so you're familiar with MP Larry Maguire?
Yeah.
So so I'm following that a lot, and a couple people I'm working with behind the scenes are all helping all that stuff unravel. Recently, he's posed questions to the House of Commons to get answers. So that 45-day window that originally started in America is now starting with Canada. So we're hoping to get some answers from the House of Commons in respect to that through Larry Maguire. Now, previous to that, a journalist by the name of Daniel Otis had made a report that the new minister for transport, Omar, I can't say his last name, has been briefed and prepped on to what to say if pressed on the topic of UFOs or UAPs in Canada. So there's a document, I have it queued up too if you need to see it. But so what's interesting about that is he's kind of told, in a sense, what to say if pressed by the media. So he's essentially told, from my recollection is just to refer to the Cador reports, refer to Transport Canada, refer to all the things that we already know here in the subculture, and kind of deflect it. My current thought with the move with Maguire is, now that we know that there's a prepped response for Transport Canada, even though he's asking a higher body, are they going to give a different answer, or are they going to follow in suit? Because this is just something that was heard about, that Freedom of Information request was gathered. So there's a lot of things going on. So it's in the news. It's not mainstream, but it's getting there. And I think it's important, if what's going on in America is, legitimate, because it affects us with borders and things like that too. We do know that, with service reports, Canada does have to pass information off to the United States and NORAD and all that other stuff too. So there's a transfer of information. We don't have control of the information. We start the investigations, we hand it off. So there's a lot of push over on the American side to get that confirmation, because that'll kind of help. But when Canada looks at the American stuff, the answers that are coming back are more so like, we only respond to things that are credible, which kind of implies that these aren't credible things, or these aren't things of threats. So if I were to step outside of all this disclosure stuff and listen to or look at the facts of what's being said, I'm seeing that these objects are not threatening. So when you get the Navy in America, who recently, through John Greenwald, we recently got them to say that, yeah, these UFO files exist, but we're not releasing them because they released information about our technologies that could damage national security. Now, that's a valid response, but in the same time, they say UFOs exist, unidentified flying objects, but they're unidentified to them or unidentified to us, and that's perspective, and that doesn't necessarily mean aliens. But what I'm being told by that is that they know what it is, they have it, they're aware of it, and they're not giving the evidence because they're worried about what their machines might, how that would affect national security. They're not worried about the crafts that are seen in these videos. They're more worried about ourselves. So if it's extraterrestrial or if it's human, they know what it is, and it's non-threatening, and or at least appears to be, and I'm okay with that. The issue that I have with, which drives me, is this whole I'm being abducted, I'm being assaulted, I'm being kidnapped, brainwashed, all these nightmares and drama associated phenomenon that might be linked to these crafts, might be. They could be something totally different, reverse engineered, all that other stuff. We can figure that out once we get confirmation of something. But I have a declassified document on my website, in the timeline there, 1952. It's in our Royal Canadian Air Force NRCMP interrogation of a German engineer who claims it's just German technology, and that's the end, case closed. But that's just one document. So I don't see this UAP UFO phenomenon any different than the new Air Force.
And I know in the States, Ryan, they're trying to really push the threat narrative. Like that's a huge thing for them. It's a threat, and they're approaching all the other countries like this is a potential threat. Canada's angle on this seems to be a little bit more like, well, let's focus on the science of it. Like, let's focus where they come from, what's their technology. It seems a little bit more sound to approach it that way and not scare the public.
Yeah,
but we have these two, polar opposites. We got Canada going, hey, let's explore this as a possible yay situation, where you got the States pushing more of the
Canada's
threat
also
narrative.
been open. Like 1995, they transferred the documents from the NRC to the archives of Canadian Library of Archives or whatever. So there's thousands and thousands of declassified documents that no one's going through. They're just perusing it and trying to find these things, but it's missing information, right? It's not, but they're open about it. They have coins that have been minted about, Falcon Lake, Shag Harbor, so Canada accepts the possibility. They're not like denying the existence. They're not really pushing into it. So, we're okay with it, but I kind of feel like that approach is because they know more than they can tell us, but they can't tell us because it's the States that has control of the information. So perhaps that kind of in your face, here's your stuff, here's what we know, their hands are tied. If you look at the Avro, 52, I think, when that was made, Cold War still, 2 of them already made, and then all of a sudden they gave the patent to the United States. So the technology for a saucer shape craft does exist. It did exist. They reversed engineered something. Fast forward 80 years, we now have a space force. And you know what, here's an interesting fact too, is we had planes before we had the Air Force. That's why they called it the Air Force, because they had planes.
Right.
So we now have a space force, but where are the spaceships?
I mentioned that, Ryan. I said, which one comes first, the crew or the ships?
The spaceships are coming. And how do you say that? You gotta prep it, you gotta take the information, you gotta control it, and you gotta put it out. But what happened as a result of that? Well, you have this information being leaked out. Now you gotta contain a data breach. That's more important. It doesn't matter whether the video is considered a drone by Congress or whatever, and that last thing, whatever happened, whatever they consider it to be. You can't ignore the fact that information was supposed to be protected, was not protected, and people of the government went against the government for whatever reason they want to breach information. So they can do that with that. They can do that with anything. And these guys, it's actually a criminal offense. It's against the law. And so as a business owner and who has employees, I kind of look at that like, how do you change your policies when you have so many employees? So the United States government has so many employees, and whatever their policy was in place allowed this information to get out. It created this uproar. Now they're doing damage control. and at the same time removing the stigma so it normalizes. And what I think might just happen is they're not going to tell us anything. They're just going to say, okay, everything's up and running. We'll give a report. Here's the report. Nothing to see here. And just continue to say that every year, that there's nothing here, but show that they're looking into it.
Right.
Do you think there's a recent catalyst on the Canadian side? Because I mean, I think of Paul Hellyer, responding to a crash in Manitoba somewhere, and the Americans were already there cleaning it up, and he's the head of the Canadian Defense, and that's what charged him up to join the National Press Club and all the rest, to say, I was the highest guy in the military, and I wasn't privy to this. So what the hell's going on if it's above my pay grade? So was there like a separate catalyst event in Canada? Or is this all a result of like tic-tac in the last 5 years where everybody's really starting to open their eyes and talk? You think it's just like most things piggybacking on American trickle effect, or did something happen on our side of the border?
Well, that I'm aware of. I know with the history of Rutowski and the history of Cameron, Chris Stiles, like a few others, to name. And even Friedman who's passed, they in their times they pushed and they've been on the news and they pushed the narrative to a certain point. It just wasn't popular in American television, right? So now we are piggybacking because we have to, to take the momentum. It's an opportunity. Why not? Right. So we had a private discussion with this team that we're not really a team. It's a non-team. So we do our own thing, but we're kind of doing our own thing. But to get this into mainstream media took a lot of movement, a lot of shifting, but we had to piggyback off that momentum, because to say the Me Too kind of, like, in a sense, right? Like, and not to talk ill of that movement, separate movement, but that kind of that example in terms of, we have UFOs too. We were there at the Cold War. We have issues. There's no wall between us and them. Like, we're at risk and all these other things too. So the narrative is there and people optimized on it and they took it. And now we're at that point in real time that in 45 days, we should get a response from the House of Commons on what they say, which puts us in the same spot as the Americans were a few years back or a year back. I can't remember what time it is with the pandemic. And then if America closes the lid on it and Canada closes the lid on it, then that's the end of it. And the rest of it is speculation. But if it's the end of it, is it the truth? And that's the issue with this movement, is there's different versions of truth. There's perspectives. Everyone wants if you analyze the facts and you accept them as they are, it's already been figured out. It's not a threat. It's not an issue. We got it. We want to know about it. We can't tell you. We've already told you what we can, but you want more, and we can't do anything about that. It's like, firing someone. Like, you can't do it. I understand you're upset, you're losing your house and all these other things, but I still gotta let you go. It's a difficult thing to say, and that to me indicates that there's something else going on, which is why I focus on studying people. So the Experiential Support Association is a study of the people and how they are affected by the phenomenon, and why they are affected by the phenomenon, and which types of phenomenon they're affected with, and what methods they use to interact with the phenomenon, to figure out what parallels between all phenomenons to understand what might be happening. So the common denominator, or the common link between all phenomenons, is the human being. We all have faith, we all have different beliefs, we all have different understandings, we all have all these other things, but we also have these different layers of psychic abilities. And I'm also trying to work with the paranormal community and the UFO, UAP community to kind of bridge the data together so that more information can be shared to understand the deeper rooted things. So if these are just machines, then they're probably human oriented, unless they're controlled consciously with remote viewing. And that's something that needs to be explained, and all that other stuff too. But if you take that consciousness perspective in the UFO side and you look at telekinesis, that's still consciousness activity, right? It's just in that paranormal spectrum. So there's a lot of stigma that the UFO community wants to avoid in the paranormal community, because they don't want, they need to focus on their nuts and bolts. But the reality of it, this abduction phenomenon and this interaction with these species, there's some sort of space that that our minds are able to go to, whether we're dreaming, whether we're meditating, whether near-death experience, we're getting information from a place, and we're seeing a variance of things and calling them different things. So when I work with the people and I ask them, describe a light, describe what you saw, and they're talking about what I call sensory display aerial activity. It's either level 1 or level 2, which is either a machine or a light. And how would you describe it? And I'm looking at archetypes. So we have a light in the sky that's moving around. So in the UFO community, we would call that a UAP. Some still might call that a UFO, but I tend to use the word UFO for machines, UAP for lights. It's kind of how I separate it, despite how we're told. But some people also call paranormal, like as a ghost orb. So that is a perspective. But when you remove that archetype and you look at the image, it's still a light in the sky, which is why it's a sensory display, because a sensor, one of your senses was used to observe it. You either saw it or you heard it, or perhaps it was in your mind. So it allows the possibility of psychic sightings to happen, because just because somebody isn't able to take a picture of it, or they took these pictures and it's not there anymore, doesn't mean it wasn't actually there. And you validate the witness and characterize all those other things. It's possible they might have seen it in their mind. So the way that I do my study, when I do that with each individual people and I approach it, and I'm doing reports on this, of course, to show this study, I'm seeing that people are calling it different things and they have different methods. Some people can take pictures of it. Some people can don't have pictures of it, but are having dreams of it. Some people meditate and then they see it. And when they all draw it and you look at these images together, it doesn't matter how they got there. It's just you have, it appears to be interdimensional if this object is the same object that all these people are seeing. So the resemblance, the compare and contrast that I see is that they're all seeing these different types of orbs. So there's a constant, this orb exists, but we have this variance of where it might be and what reality it might be. But we have a bunch of different witnesses that are able to see it. So when I focus on the people, then I look at their the biological data that they provide with their reports on our system. So, hair color, eye color, blood type, all those other things. There seems to be commonalities with that as well.
Really?
So there seems to be patterns that certain types of people at certain types of ages and things like that are able to observe this activity. So, and that kind of doesn't make us crazy. It's just trying to understand where to look. Now, of course, I can understand the nuts and bolts community where how do you prove consciousness? How do you prove the stuff in your mind? How can you prove it's not a dream? And that's where the investigating skill comes in, because you got to build a case and you need multiple witnesses, and you got to build the case the same way and take that and remove that fluff and then create a new regulated system. So I created a classification system, which is an homage to Hynek and Vallée's classification scale. I haven't had the privilege to talk to Vallee about it. I did reach out to him, but I did speak to Paul Hynek about it before I made it. And then he told me there was no offense taken if I try to, do a different scale. But essentially, it's the Hynek and Vallee classification scale, just one little section in it, and the rest is all new. And the point of that is to break down all of this phenomenon and put it in these new baskets to try to understand what it could be while removing the archetype. So another example would be beings observed. So we just agree that it's a being that was observed. You can call it an alien, you can call it a ghost, you could call it a shadow figure, you can call it whatever you want. That's, it's just like different religions. We all have a God. So that's what brings us together. We can agree that there is a higher power, but we might have different characteristics or different thoughts on that. So it's kind of that same concept. And then, so I'm noticing that when I see shadow figures drawn and I ask for the archetype, what they think it is, they're calling these beings that I know in the UFO community are technically aliens, but they're calling them ghosts. Or there's these alien figures, so these ghostly figures, and they're calling them aliens. So the people themselves also don't know what to call them, but they're observing similar things. So when I remove the labels and look at that again, I do start to see characteristics. And some of these photos that I have or drawings that I have, there's this cloak. This cloak seems to be common. I have these shadow figures wearing cloaks. I have reptilians wearing cloaks. I have Palladians wearing cloaks. So different people in different stages remember different pieces of information, but these cloaks seem to be common. Just in this particular study that I'm working on. So what that tells me is that like there's this cloak idea that we need to focus on. That's kind of all that, because when the person perceives it, when the person remembers it, there's so many things going on, and you got to look at the individual, and there's got to be a lot of belief. This is also very important. The reason why I'm able to get this much information is because I believe that something happened. I just don't necessarily believe that what they think happened is what actually happened. And there are some cases where, especially with sexual assault, which I mentioned before, it's just oppressed or suppressed childhood trauma that they mask between an alien. It was just easier to say it was abducted by aliens than to admit that a step parent had abused them. So like there's a lot of those things that kind of go in when you get into these abduction cases. So what I'm finding is that there is the government who is forced to respond as they should as our leaders, and they need to do something because it got out of hand. So they're containing control of the information to move on to the next step. And then you have people that are experiencing a phenomenon without any support whatsoever. And then there's this great deal of trauma, anxiety, I wouldn't say mental illness, but there are these fears that they might be perceived as being mentally ill because they associate these things with that. So there's still, the people need to be taken care of. So the point of the Experiencer Support Association with the investigations and all this other stuff is to provide resources to help live and cope with the experience, no matter what it is. Because even if I tell them it's not an alien, I have no proof of that. It's just a belief. But they're living with it every day and think it's negative. So the easiest thing for me to do is to try to help them take that negative and make it a positive, right? And then if they're changing the way they're thinking, then they change the way they feel. And if they change the way they feel, then everything kind of changes from there in a positive way. So if disclosure, see, it depends on who we're asking what we're going to get in confirmation. So we'll get confirmation from a government source, a human source, to give us answers about human engineered machines that may have come from ancestors that aren't even here anymore, or were never here to begin with. That doesn't matter. We have control of the information or the machines now. But then to this supernatural kind of thing that may not actually be supernatural, it's paranormal, might not even be paranormal, it's normal now. Whereas we have these abilities that may have always existed. And because we were not able to explore that, we're now learning that. And as an example, is like I'm always, when I get experiencer reports from witnesses, I get them to report all their experiences. Some might be UFO, paranormal, cryptid, all these other things. And then I timeline the ones that are that I can't identify, at least. And just because I can't identify it doesn't mean it's an unknown. It just means I don't know what it is, and I'm hoping somebody else will. But I'm seeing this pattern where it starts with some sort of what I call visitation, because I don't like the word abduction. It implies negative off the bat, so I say visitation, so it could be negative or positive. I'm also measuring positive experiences because that's information as well. Well, some people don't want to talk about the positive stuff because it doesn't have that threat negative, a narrative. If it bleeds, it leads kind of type deal. But you can still get good information from those who believe in the angels and all that other stuff, because there's those, if you know how to build a case. So we're getting into this evolution pattern that I'm seeing, is that these experiencers have some sort of visitation or contact at an early age. And their early child ages, might have a paranormal experience. And then in their teenage years, there's some poltergeist activity. And then as they get older, they have this interest in pseudomedicine, or like Reiki, or meditation and things like that. And then all of a sudden, close to end of life, they're like a blown out psychic and tarot reader and all these other things. So when you meet these people at different parts of their life, when you understand their history as an individual, there's signs of evolution. And it's possible that there was contact that was made, whether that's, and if that's human contact, then that would be the MK Ultra kind of scenario where they're experimenting with, with the mind, because we know that exists. They know they knew something in order to test with it. Whether those still happens, that's the thing. But something happened then. We've evolved over the years, and perhaps this paranormal thing is actually the real, I guess, wolf in sheep's clothing, if you will, real mask that kind of tells us that we as beings aren't as superior as we should be, because we're afraid of these ghosts. We're afraid of this poltergeist activity. We're afraid of this psychic stuff. But really, if it's evolution, then this is the way we are, and it's the way we should be. So with the Experiencers Support Association, through the studies too, we try to want to encourage people to develop these abilities as well, if they have it, to prove it and to test it in the parapsychology side. So the interesting thing is this poltergeist phenomenon is, you get into this part where you come home and all of a sudden these cupboards are opening up and closing and all these other things. And then you automatically think 9 times out of 10 it's a ghost. It's threatening because it's terrifying. You want to leave your house. You want to do all these other things. You don't want to be around it. But when I get in and I talk to them and I ask, cross-examine, if you will, and say things like, is it possible that you moved them? And when you start thinking about it, it's like, I was stressed that day. It was in my teenage years, all the studies that suggest that, I was going through puberty, like all these markers that have been studied kind of exist. And you're like, maybe I did move them. And then it becomes a conversation of like, well, why don't you try and move them the next time you're feeling stressed? And then I've had some cases where people come back and say, Ryan, I tried and I moved them. I'm like, what? You got it recorded and things like that? No, of course. But, I'm having conversations like that. So by encouraging them to develop these abilities, it's not threatening, because it's spreading light, encouraging them to, to do these healing things and embrace the beings that they are, so that way they can help other people. And if they help other people love each other, then there's less anger and there's less fighting. And if confirmation is going to happen, they need more loving people to give this information to. When the pandemic happened, they gave information and they gave instructions, and we as a human race did not handle that well. We did
toilet paper rush.
We prioritized toilet paper. So if that was an experiment, or if that was real, or if that was like a judgment on whether or not we can handle aliens, we failed.
Mm-hmm.
So I acknowledge and I accept all of these possibilities. My study shows me that it's not a threat. It's more focused on the people. We are the key and we are the link. So I'm focusing on the people for the future, so that way we can be ready to help those that might just realize that, they're mutants, like Mutant X-Men, that kind of scenario. Because we want disclosure to happen. I know some people do, but there's no one prepping, at least what I can see, or at least anymore, for what to do afterwards. My generation, the next generation, the children's generation, they're the ones that are going to take this home. It's not going to be us.
Yeah.
So,
what do you say to skeptics and people that are, polarized, either straight up nuts and bolts UFO or totally paranormal fringe, and those people in the middle that say the two don't exist in the same realm? In fact, I had somebody on Facebook a few days ago comment that, and it was towards Preston Dennett. We had an episode with him, and he's written books on both paranormal and ufology. So it's a relevant topic to ask him those questions. And some people had said, he brought up a lot of really sensational experiences, and they're like, why didn't you hammer him and say, hey, where's the proof and this and that? And, again, that's not our flavor of show. We don't do that anyway. We believe totally. And I think myself personally, ever since speaking to George Knapp, when he's describing, the hitchhiker effect from going to Skinwalker Ranch, and, a nuts and bolts ufology guy is now having weird poltergeist stuff happen at home, and his wife, and even Colin Kelleher, his partner, and his wife, and all the rest. So I'm more open to it, but we're also in the field. We're talking to experts every week, and we're on the front line of this stuff. But there's still a generation of ufologists that want to believe that don't see the intersect. And do you think there's a disconnect there, or is that just our own bias?
You know what? And I myself included, I was like that in the beginning. I think first time we had Ryan on, I was still on the fence. I was not convinced that this stuff happens, and now I'm more convinced. So that's
I mean, it's okay. There's a lot to break down there. So it either all exists or none of it exists.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah. So if none of it exists, then we just have this fantasy, and this is a hope that we've created this religion we've created to know that there's life after there. So we have a reason to be slaves to the government and pay our taxes. It's hope.
Or so death isn't so scary.
Or so death isn't so scary.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. There's got to be a purpose for it. If it does exist, and therefore what we're doing is for a reason to help a higher power for something else for whatever reason. So either way, there's purpose. Yeah. So to be right wing and left wing, or one side or the other side, and not be able to tether, there's personality in that, there's culture in that, there's hard beliefs. There's economic motivation behind that. So if you're a science guy, you can't talk about these taboo stuff because you lose your funding, and things like that. So a lot of people are tight-lipped because they don't want to lose their academia and all these other alumni of their associations and things like that too. Paranormal side, I mean, they dream to be honored as an academic, but they can't be welcomed into that because they're ridiculed with people from like Ghost Adventures that think that you can wear tight shirts and scare the ghost away, and as a risk analysis, the last thing I would do is entice anything without knowing its true capability. And if you're yelling at an unseen force in the middle of a dark area by yourself, and this entity does exist, you're going to lose. So it's not
Stephen Hawking said that. I think we shouldn't be out there shouting in the universe because we don't know what's out there and what might happen.
Could be nasty.
So another interesting parallel to help you guys understand where I'm at, like I said, it all exists. And the reason why it all exists is because the people exist. The people are experiencing phenomenon. What's not being completely understood on a whole, because we're lack of answers, is what's the cause of the phenomenon. But we are able to experience it. So we compare ourselves and what we do and how we do, then we can understand that we have the ability to do these things, like with the auras, the energy healing with Reiki. Like, that's all human, normal stuff. But like, when you get into propaganda and mainstream media and all these subliminal messaging and stuff, I kind of feel like paranormal and ufology were kind of twins at birth and then separated. In terms of making fun of one, which is actually the truth. And then now we're starting to focus more on the science side. To kind of have control of that. It's almost like, in the witch burning ages, when the women were more, still are, of course, but then, they were afraid of them because they had an understanding of science at a greater level than the men did at that time. So there's these fear things going on. So let's look at the Ouija board as a medium, as a tool. And then we compare that to a CE5, which is a meditation practice that you would do to try and summon UFOs. So the CE5 movement would use a radio signal, a machine, they would meditate, and then they would intentionally try to make contact with extraterrestrials. The seance is a board with letters and all these other things on it. And they would set the mood, set candles, meditate, and try to make a connection with spirit. So the human is a constant in that. They're both meditating in that sense, and there's both putting intentional thought out there. And when you get that response, that immediate reaction, we don't know if it's extraterrestrial, there's an assumption, and we don't know if it's ghost, it's an assumption. But the other thing that we're not taking into effect is there's other people in that room projecting thoughts. So how do we know, as receivers of this information, we're not receiving a thought from some other human being from somewhere else? So if I'm meditating right now and my goal is to put energy out there and love out there to say, you know what, so for all the people that are having a bad day, I'm going to say this mantra, this is going to be for everyone. And then somewhere else, like you guys are meditating in your space or praying to your God because you're having a bad day and you want an answer. And then all of a sudden you hear my words of wisdom and you think it's God, but you don't know that, but you hear it, you picked it up, and then you go on your day. So there's if you normalize it, it's not, it's us. It's basically where I'm getting, which kind of removes the woo, which doesn't make it all fancy. But the reason why it's not all fancy is because there's a lot of people in this industry who are making a lot of profit off of it.
Yeah.
They sell
and
books.
selling the threat narrative. You know,
Correct.
if you're military trained through
Mhm.
and through, I like to say when you're a hammer, I think Stephen Greer said it and I've kind of stole it, but when you're a hammer, all you see are nails.
Mhm.
So it would make sense that those who were trained that way to be constantly paranoid, and for good reason in war, but in
Mhm.
your day-to-day and social interactions, that's not necessarily the best way to go about things, right? That in
Yeah.
itself is a limiting bias because you're not
Mhm.
necessarily as open to the other side.
Mhm.
So hence is this paradigm where we're all somewhere on this spectrum in terms of our belief. And we mentioned it on Dave Scott's show that they say you should never discuss religion and politics with your friends. Well, this topic delves
It's
into
both.
both of those terms. You
Yeah.
know, it has religious
Yeah.
implications and
Mhm.
political ones, especially if they've been withholding things and are continuing to do that. So
Yeah,
it is
Morally,
that
as
realm,
well, too.
and it's a big rabbit hole.
And who wants to admit to that, you know? So
For
when
sure.
like it's the way it was. I mean, with the queen passing too, things are going to change with the king, you know, like there's the world's in for a big shift, and you know, why not? You know, this could be a different type of reset, but the world is resetting. um yeah, so like where my heart's at though is just trying to be available and understanding to the experiencers, because like my job, I have to, like my career, I need to balance thoughts, I need to balance evidence, and I need to cater to the emotions of either party. So like if I'm dealing with a child custody dispute, you know, both parents are trying to prove the other parent unfit, but but the things that they do to prove the other parent unfit isn't fair to the children. So we got to think of the children. It's what matters for the children, and then you got to do the job, get paid, and do all these other things. And hopefully that child has a thing. So these experiencers are the children, you know, and the parents, I guess, is the, you know, mainstream media and the government, you know, like all fighting over truth and answers, whatever. But like who's taking care of our children? Because what happens, you know, there's a lot, all that stuff needs to be taken into consideration. But there's untreated, having it untreated is dangerous as well. So if the phenomenon exists, there are people that are affected by PTSD, anxiety, and traumas and things like that, that should be getting mental health support or mental health guidance. Maybe don't necessarily need to be medicated, but they need to at least be able to talk to mental health professionals to rule out a couple things. Maybe they do have schizophrenia, maybe they do have things like that, but they might not even be related to the event. But maybe they are psychic, maybe they are special, maybe they are gifted. You know, so I kind of view this community of experiencers as like, you know, a group of people that are experiencing a phenomenon that is untreated. And by treated, I don't mean it needs to be cured or it needs to be fixed. It just needs to be identified and balanced so we can stop being afraid of it, right?
I think Kevin Day is a perfect example of a guy who has PTSD as a result of this. You know, he was involved with the Tic Tac incident, and you see him on Caroline Corey's A Tear in the Sky, and he's noticeably shaken and emotional about this. Now, he doesn't have PTSD from seeing his buddy get blown to pieces beside him. It's from a UAP experience or whatever, paranormal, whatever you want to classify it as. Some weird shit happened and he was ridiculed and everything else. And that is partially part of the PTSD, was the after effect, but it's cause and effect. And the cause was one of these experiences. And for some people that are maybe already borderline in that, dealing with other things as well, this is enough to really push them over the edge. And good on you for having a support group, because people need it. They don't know who to talk to, and you don't want to be made a fool of or look, you know, weak to people or be vulnerable. So they need this type of support.
They do, and we're not the only ones doing this type of philosophy, or if you will, this type of there's a lot of people trying to help experiencers who understand this concept. What I'm trying to do is regulate it so that way when I make referrals, that I'm referring them to actual people that have the credentials that they claim that they have. Because when you get into pseudotherapy or pseudotherapy, I think that's fine with that, like hypnosis and Reiki. They have to make money off of that, but they're going to buy into, there are some people in this industry that buy into the UFO abduction phenomenon and buy into the possibility of them being abducted, so that way they can receive payment to do their treatment on it. But some of these hypnotherapists are re-victimizing them because they're not psychologists, they're not doing all these other things, not the proper mental health. So there are supports out there that I can refer these people to, but they're not good enough. So I want better supports for these people. And when I find more regulated data, I add it to the website to be free and things like that, of course, too. But I can only, like, my role is like, well, I need experts. Okay. So like I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, but I need a team of experts in which I can take all this sample and all the study and all these people that are coming to me for answers. And I need to refer them to people that I can trust. So another example that I could use for that is if you go to a crime scene as a police officer, you don't know it's a crime scene, but you identify it as a crime scene and you look and there's blood everywhere. You know enough in your police training that is forensic evidence and that can't be touched, and it needs to stay that way until the experts come and control the sample, right? So in here, guarding the scene, talking to the witnesses, getting all this information, making my notes as the police officer, doing all those things, and then the forensic unit comes in, takes a sample, and then we wait, and lab comes back and tells me, and I match the blood, then I make the arrest. So I'm in that police officer kind of stage, but I don't have any CSI. I have all these people that I've spoken to. I have all these people that need help. I know all the things that could help, I could refer them to, but I don't have any experts. Right. And the reason why I don't have any experts is every ones that have come my way, when I ask them to prove me that they have the credentials that they claim that they have, they don't have them. And I can't in good faith refer someone to someone who's not licensed or in that practice to treat the experiencer with anything. I'm not going to send them to a doctor who doesn't have a license to practice. So that's what I'm trying to also do, is find people that do have these credentials, that are able to break that stigma and maybe are self-employed like myself, when there's no one can fire me, and I can be free and say whatever I want and practice that, and then create these resources for these people. Because, and if it's not my job to prove that aliens exist or ghosts exist, it's to treat the anxieties as it is, because once I de-escalate and I get another report, they either rationalize it as something logical, we move on, or they give me information that gives me closer to identifying what it may or may not be, and I kind of narrow it all down and remove the trauma. Right. And I have a better understanding of what it is that I'm looking at. And then even when I do all that and rule all these things out and compound it, do a compare and contrast, I'm still left with things that these people are seeing and observing that don't make sense. They're not biologically sound. So there is evidence of something existing, but it's in this space. That,
at least with a crime scene, you have the physical blood. You can visually see it. You're investigating things that are in people's minds, their thoughts. They're either super, elevated in terms of receiving or in terms of sending. So that's a hard thing to quantify. I mean, that's the main argument topic on UFO Twitter. How do you quantify it?
UFO Twitter is a disease, but
it's fun.
Well said.
So anyone who listens, I always say this as a preface: I'm on UFO Twitter to work. I'm on Facebook to play. So you want to have fun, come to Facebook. You want to have a bad time, troll me on Twitter.
Speaking of which, where can people find you if they want to get involved with your organization or learn more? Where can they find your information?
So you can find everything that I do on the TESA website. So it's experiencersupport.org. That's where my research is, my investigations and all that other stuff, as well as some programs that we have. If you want to follow me as an individual, I'm on Facebook at Heed the World, and on Twitter, Heed the World RS_RS. I'm all over the place, but I'm trying that TikTok thing that don't work. That don't work well. I'm not one of those guys.
It's hard to get a hold of, like just the hang of the whole thing. And
well, I can't make fun of it. It's not a game. It's serious. This is people are getting there's something serious going on.
Yeah, you're not going to do a shuffle dance with an alien standing beside you.
No, right? It's not, and that's not my style. And I'm taking this as a criminal approach, right? And it's the same thing I do every day, whether I'm investigating a infidelity, like cheating husband or spouse or wife, pardon me, missing children. I do that too. Whatever I'm trying to figure out, the investigating process is the same, and I'm trying to find the person or persons that are responsible. So that's why it's so easy for me to find all this information, to land into this human element, to know and trust that, okay, that it's not something that the whole world is going to lose its mind over. So now we can kind of dial in and focus in on these people and be like, and reassure them that I don't think, but perhaps you're able to see another space and time. Maybe they're able to see the future. Maybe they're able to see the past. It's not up to me. There's no way that anyone could tell anybody to control their thoughts or how their dreams work. You ever like have a dream and wonder, where the hell that came from? Like, where does that stuff come from? Like, there's no way to regulate that. But the people, if it leads the people to do good, then I want to encourage them to do more of that. What I don't want to see is the fear and the panic and anxiety from them thinking that they're being abducted or they're being harmed or they're being taken. And if these things do happen, I want to kind of have them believe that it's a dream if it's possible. But if they think it's not a dream and it's a reality and all these things happen, can't argue that. So then that's when you just continue to have they continue to report and they continue to provide images and things like that. A lot of our people are seeing the same thing. So we're having a shared phenomenon. That's where I need experts like Pally and all these other people to kind of say, like, yeah, this is what that means. This is what that means. Parapsychology is kind of in my alley too. Both people understand the human element, but it is connected to UFOs, because if the paranormal people can connect through consciousness, there's remote viewing, which uses consciousness to some degree to control these UFOs or these drones or these UAPs.
We talked about that before, Ryan, on the podcast a few times, about how the consciousness of these crafts, the crafts appear to be conscious, like they can see all around. They're able to fly at the speed of thought, because that's literally the speed at which these things take off, is the speed of thought, at least the speed of my thoughts. Maybe some people are faster, but yeah, we talked about that a bit. Even some alien abductions where some of the kids were allowed to fly the crafts, and that the crafts operated on their consciousness. Exactly.
It's not old. It's old news. It's just we don't have confirmation, and that's the way that it is. We have documentation that shows they were studying it. We have documentation that they were aware of saucer technology, and they were perhaps trying to reverse engineer it and all these other things. We have evidence of all these things taking place. What's missing is the silence that when the day they decided, we're keeping this quiet, all these years, and whether or not they continue to work on these projects in silence. And now we are getting to an age where everyone has a cell phone, everyone can take pictures, everyone can do all these other things. More evidence is coming forward. And eventually it's going to get to a point that if it does exist, someone's going to catch something. And then
to your point about ESP and people who can do remote viewing and all that, I like to think of it as we are not human beings having spiritual experiences. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And when you look at it that way, the idea of intertravel and all the rest is not so crazy, because we can become transmedium. And I mean, even the art of meditation is to access or download from that main consciousness, right? So this is a temporary phase. And I think that fits within religion too, that says there was a before you, there's your life, but then there's going to be an afterlife somehow. And whether that's just in a reassuring sense or whether it's actually true, we don't know. but it makes more sense to me if we are indeed spiritual beings that have the potential of multiple lives or no beginning, no end. If we are that seed of creation, we don't expire. Our bodies may, but that spark that's within everything and in life itself, it never goes away. This is just a human experience for a spiritual body, and the people are the body and becoming the evidence.
But so are the entities as well. Sorry, Ryan. Just
okay.
because some of the entities as well, they they express the consciousness is the same. That when somebody looks at a gray and the gray says, "You and I are the same," what are they referring to? Right? Physically, we're not the same at all, but consciously, we might all be the same. There might be some sort of galactic consciousness that every species becomes aware of, and we become a collective. Who knows?
Or they're them, or they're us in the future. If you look at Michael Paul Masters,
we gotta look at the timeline. We either coexist or pre-exist or future pro-exist, whatever that would be. The first degree in masonry working tools, part of that lecture says the root material receives its fine finish from repeated efforts alone, and nothing short of indefatigable exertion shall induce the habit of virtue, enlighten the mind, and render the soul pure. That line is speaking about consciousness, and so like there is a lot of consciousness discussion if you were to look at the rituals in masonry. So, and I just kind of want to put that out there to kind of give evidence to an ancient tradition that has existed for a long time. So this knowledge has been known, and it got to a point where they didn't want us to know this anymore. And then now we're getting to the point where we're evolving and we don't know what's going on. We can't control it. And
it's like we're going through puberty, but as a social,
I want to touch on your working tools lecture, because I'm also a Freemason, and to the point of, imagine taking a block in rude form and making it straight and whatever. You have the hammer and the chisel. So if the establishment is the hammer, it is nothing without that indefiable or indefatigable effort of that chisel. You cannot take a hammer and make something precise. It is rude and unrefined. Whereas the chisel is where you put on your fine finish.
You need them both.
We are the chisels of ufology, people.
That's right. So you understand that. Little cryptid there, borderline. Well, that's not really secret. That's just a passage.
Nothing you can't find on Google at this point.
That's right. Anyways. But I mean, the point is, everybody knows this, or everybody knew this, and then they stopped telling us that. But then it's by stopping. I mean, it was replaced with Christianity, I guess, or Catholicism, and there's still the Holy Trinity, which is consciousness too. So consciousness is present in a lot of things, and it's overlooked in mainstream media. So I don't care too much about the UFOs and the UAPs, because like that is not that's man's problem. Man wants to be man, and they want to put the spaceship on the moon, and they can't even do that again. But
seems like we're having a rough time doing that.
So let's before putting the cart before the horse, I guess, in that sense. But like, that's a man's issue. So the intellectual part, the magic, if you will, all exists in Norse mythology. Witches, like, I mean, it's a positive thing. Male and female was never negative. If you actually go back and look at all the things that we had oppressed, that we're now all of a sudden accepting, were all the things that were plentiful back in the day too. All these movements, like African Americans, females, homosexuality, all those things like that. Those were banned, but at one point prior to now, they were also accepted. And all these things were common, and the way that people lived their life, and that spiritual and that consciousness and that magic, all that things was there in mythology, if it's myth. But if it was reality, it was oppressed, it was stopped, so we couldn't do that anymore. So man could take over, I don't know. But now we're starting to take back, and we're fighting. So like there's it's interesting the way that the human is evolving. What does that mean for the rest of the world? I don't know, but I just kind of feel with my efforts, if I focus on the people today, then the future will be better no matter where we end up. Because if I'm wrong, which I could very well be, and aliens do exist and UFOs do have an extraterrestrial nature, because that's still a possibility. I hope that a lot of people don't like rate our toilet paper as a response to hearing that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I take care of the people.
But Ryan, in your experience,
Mhm.
have you had some people that you're just like, there's no way that this is legit? Like they're pulling your leg, they're not cooperating with you, or their story doesn't seem to be collaborating with somebody else's. Like there's got to be those cases that you get occasionally that don't add up.
Yeah, so I mean that is subjective to my my interpretation and my own understanding of of what I'm trying to prove as well. So like I try to do statement analysis on everything as well. I try to take like the statement as it is verbatim, and then I summarize it, and then I try to add in all the things that I need to have to come to the conclusion, and then I ask these questions to the witnesses. So sometimes, even with MUFON, you either get a response or you don't, right? So if you don't get a response, it's inconclusive because you don't have these answers. You don't know why they did all these things. So it's everything is possible. To some things that don't line up might be like a day or two off of the date. Like there has to be, it has to be reasonable, right? So if someone tells me that the date was this and they send me the file and it was 2 days before, you know, that doesn't mean they're lying. They were just from memory, right? But they did have the evidence, so that evidence kind of reinforces the fact that the event did occur, right? So if there's lack of evidence is hard. So when they don't have evidence, so they can't take so by evidence I mean demonstrative evidence, so they can't take a photo or a video. I ask them to draw. So if they're drawing things, then they're spending the time doing it. They're answering my questions. They're going back and forth. They're not arguing with me. I kind of look at it that way to see what their participation level is. And then from there, I kind of establish the credibility of the character. Whether I believe the scenario to be true or not, that's not up to me, because that's what I'm trying to figure out what exactly is happening. But I'm understanding this rapport with the experiencer, that I know that if I need to ask questions, they'll answer them for me. You know, and then if I rule out all these things and investigate properly, then I should be at this situation where I'm comfortable and I'm confident that the experiencer believes what they believe and what they think they know, and they respect me enough to challenge these beliefs. And this is where we end up together in the middle. Because if I say it's this when with the same amount of proof or same amount of evidence, that's just my interpretation. That's my belief. And that person might accept it because they think whatever they think of me in that moment. I might be the only person they've ever talked to in this subject, you know, or they might have talked to, you know, a valet before me and think I'm just, I'm out to lunch, you know, like there's different perspectives on whoever I'm talking to, but I always treat it as if I'm the only person that they have. And I need to make sure and that we come to a balanced thought. So when I do that process, I never get a feeling that they're being deceitful or dishonest, because they're putting a lot of effort into that. Because at that point it's private, there's no monetary gain, there's nothing that they can get. All those rules are kind of defined, and it's done in an anonymous setting. When some people are kind of hoaxing, it's kind of obvious in the things, but like if I send an email out to them and I don't get a response back and I don't get evidence, whether they're a crackpot or not, or just simply out of touch, or they don't want to respond because they're afraid and things like that, that doesn't matter. I don't have evidence. I can't do my job. That case is closed. I'm focusing on those that do connect. Less is more. And so I spend more time with less people, asking and going back and forth and studying and then comparing them to others. I learn more about the phenomenon through the people.
And have you found a demographic, like something, you know, either an age group or a
yeah,
specific type of person that gets taken?
So I'm working on 2 reports right now. I'm doing my Canadian current event survey for the year 2021, which is my drone and UFO report for Canada. I do that report for the science nuts and bolts guys, because to remove the paranormal for it. But basically, all these UFO sightings that you see me post for KDORs, I get all the freedom of information requests. I do an investigation with all the evidence, and then I try to I try to debunk all of them, try to prove that they're all like normal things. Once that report's done, the other report that I'm doing is the experiencer side, which is the civilian UAPs and UFO reports, paranormal, cryptid beings, all that other stuff, all that fun stuff, if you will. And that's actually, I'm calling it the pandemic edition, because it's going to be year 2020, 21, and 22. No, and 19. It's going to be a 4-year study. So that 4 years, because I have to play catch up and get all this data, and I was building a new website, there's a bit of a pause, but I'm going to have 4 years of work. So 200 plus cases of experiencer data that I'll be able to show those demographics. So I don't have the number dialed in, but from previous reports, you know, it's been females have been common, and it's been within like the 30 to 40 age range. It's believe it or not, the blood type is an A positive as a common
really?
thread, not the O negative, which is what we were told at some part with the ancient astronaut theory. So like there's different information that comes, but that's when you see the study, it's also based on my interpretation of the data, but it's also trusting that the people are giving me accurate information too.
Right.
So you know, so I'm also seeing trends in obviously Ontario, because I'm from Ontario. So that's where my highest marketing is coming from, because it is a business, you got to market, right? So there are certain characteristics in there, but that's why I focus on the things that can't change. So blood type, your skin color, that can't change. Your hair color, that can't, well, it can change, but like, you know, your predominant one, your eye color, all those things that you're kind of born with.
Is there more brunettes being abducted than blondes or anything like that you noticed?
That isn't a new study, so I don't have that data yet, but blue eyes is common.
There you go.
Right, so you can associate that fact with other things, but I mean, it's just common in my study. That does, I haven't investigated everybody in the world, you know, like you have to extrapolate that, but I mean, it's just for me, what I'm trying to do when I asked this question on Twitter the other day too, because I like the polling option. Is the data, what is it? What's more important, the data itself or what you do with the data once you have it? And so, because a lot of people like to put stats out, a lot of people like to do all these things and read it and write about it and all those things. Like Rutowski does that. He puts stats out, but I mean, nobody does anything with it. And half the stats are from other people's work. It's MUFON's work, it's my work, it's everybody else's work, and he's the guy on the TV. But at least it's getting around. But I mean, nothing's being done with that data. So when I get this data, once I have it done, it's going to help me build a case where I have a sample of people that have this criteria that I believe gives the highest probability to make some sort of contact, whether that's extraterrestrial or paranormal. If I'm going to do a CE5 or if I'm going to do a seance, I want these people in the room, because the highest probability of them, of me making contact and seeing that, it's likely that these people will be able to do that because they all share these characteristics. When you do these things as a hobby and you go and you have fun, you got a variance of people showing up. Some are enthusiasts, some are just curious, some are drunk, because you get drunk when you go to those ghost tours. Who knows? But if you get an actual controlled sample doing these things, I hypothesize that we should be able to move the object. You know, and if we can't, then I narrow down my study and try to figure out how to get the perfect sample to figure out if it's possible, because that's the science. Then with the trauma data, what I'm hoping to do is kind of tackle the disclosure part at the appropriate time in a different angle. I'm not going to be asking for confirmation. I'm just going to be bringing awareness that there are people affected mentally by this phenomenon, and I need resources to take care of these people.
Now, sorry, Ryan, are you planning on going to the Canadian government with this, like to get some sort of study and funding going?
Awareness. Whatever comes out of it will come out of it. But I mean, I think I would start with a peaceful protest, in the sense of having experiencers together where we could basically be comfortable and free and show that we are experiencers, we are affected, and we're ready. We've got to create awareness through the people. Getting it on mainstream media is in the science thing is very hard, but if you get a group of people together in one spot that all believe that they were abducted by aliens and they want answers,
Right.
probably going to get answers a little quicker. But that's not next year, that's the year after. So I'm building, I'm in year, what year am I in? I'm in the rebuild year. Next year's Unity, and then Contact is the final year in my business plan. But so
You got it all laid out, my man.
I do. I had my own psychogenic consciousness experience. So that's where I am influence. So I have to, that's why I believe it to be human. I might have just picked up a radio signal or something like that. I don't think it's unspectral or anything to that effect, but there is some sort of foresight that I seem to feel. And whenever I pay attention to that feeling and I work in that direction, everything is positive. So that's where the energy works. So there is some direction towards a need for this. I just don't know when.
And is this all discovered for you, Ryan? Like it's through investigations, through talking to people? Like this was all discovered along the way? Like did you start off a lot more sort of, I would say narrow-minded, but a little bit more narrow on your way of thinking, and it expanded as you were studying this phenomenon?
When I started, I knew nothing about even ghosts. I just thought it was this cool and spooky and Halloween thing. Right. And then when I started to get into ufology and the nuts and bolts in science and realizing that it's just a bunch of ugly people doing ugly things, I was turned off on it, but then it was taking care of the people. And then even when I was with MUFON and they reported abductions and things that weren't considered consciousness, the things of their mind and all these things that MUFON was trying to wrap around and say it was, stuff they didn't want to touch. And I started giving more attention to the consciousness part. I felt for the people, but I didn't really understand consciousness. I didn't understand dimensions. I didn't understand all these things. Even in masonry, some of that stuff, I had to go to a couple degrees a couple times to understand the lectures and things like that. You don't.
That's why they give you the book.
That's why but you still, every time you do a first degree, you're all like, I forgot about that, and then and all these other things. My favorite degree is the second degree, but so then I get to this point where I'm not understanding what consciousness is, and how do I explain this? Like, I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert. I need to understand it in such a way that I can at least work with the people, because the people want answers. Right. And I can't explain it because I can't get it. And I feel like it's got to be wrong, or maybe I'm silly, maybe I'm stupid, I can't get it. But then all of a sudden, in this trauma, the stress that I had, where I didn't belong in MUFON, I didn't want to be a part of MUFON anymore, but I didn't want to abandon the people. And I needed to still help the people, but didn't know how. And I had this vision, this dream, this idea of this map, which is on the TESA website. If you go to About Us and click the map, you'll see this map. It's a geometric map. This was a vision that I had of this map. And that's what TESA was built off of. TESA was on that, but later the Experience Support Association came and all these things. And as this map that came to me from wherever it came from, when it came from, however it came from, with no instructions, every time I reflected on it, it's got a piece of all these things that I've been talking about. There's symbolism in there. There's masonry symbolism in there. At first, I thought it was just my brain putting together all these rituals. But there's Eastern Star in there, there's Templars, there's a whole bunch of things. There's even Flat Earth stuff that's in there. Like there's a whole bunch of different types of things that I didn't know anything about. And then I started talking to the people. And when I started talking to the people, and then I go back and look at this map, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing the map in different dimensions. So this map, although it's two-dimensional, my wish, my prayer, whatever I was in my dark time that I was trying to figure out, help me, that message that I got was a two-dimensional map that helped me understand 10 dimensions in the physical room by working with this map. So we don't have time to get into that, but I'm just saying to your point that it was at that moment when I understood the possibilities, that breaking point where like this can't be real, it became this is real, it is possible, but it can't be proven. So how do I prove it? Now, how do I prove anything? This comes from my training. If I go to court and I need to testify against my evidence, but if there's a cross-examination and I need to send someone to jail, I need witnesses, I need testimony. So I'm building a team of witnesses with testimony, and I'm regulating it because I understand how the court system works. I don't understand the political system, but I do understand. I do know people who do, and I do know how, and I do help give people that information so they can write their articles and do these things. You know, so, but I do know how to handle myself in a courtroom. So that's kind of how I'm prepping everything. So that way I'm asking the right question at the right time to the right people. And that is a human rights approach, because our people are the ones that are mentally being hijacked or borrowed in their sleep to operate these crafts, or the medications that all of us are prescribed to are too high and we need to lower the dosage. You know, like there's something going on. The phenomenon is real and our people are experiencing something.
Yeah.
And there's lots of science and theories and understanding, but it's just guessing. They don't have confirmation either. But it makes sense. It's close. But then the government, what do we want from the government? The government needs to have control. So the government will not tell us it exists unless they have control. It needs to be regulated. Marijuana wasn't legalized in Canada until they were able to regulate it and tax it. It was good for many, many years.
Oh, they're going to tax abductions now.
You've
had 14 this year, so
yeah, abduction tax. Yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes entertainment, like Skinwalker Ranch. But like, yeah, maybe they do good work on there too. That is a good show in terms of, that's a hard show. Like they actually do science and they kind of make it entertaining. So but that's a challenge. Brandon gets a lot of flack on that.
Yeah,
But
we've talked. The Skinwalker
Yeah.
Ranch is its own thing, and like we've discovered by talking with George Knapp, and even Colm Kelleher that
And Thomas Winterton as well from the ranch itself.
Exactly. Those guys, they're legit, and they're saying that there's something there, that something weird is going on, and it's they can actually study it now. They got scientists there doing actual work and studying this phenomenon.
Yeah,
so.
and you got a media company that's paying them to do that work, so it could be broadcast and entertain America. So like you can there's a business side of it, and if you can accept that, it makes sense. And then there's the science side of that. There's a lot of people putting effort in citizen science, citizen journalism, citizen all these other things. Eventually, we're going to figure it out, and if we figure it out, what do
there
we
goes
do
our
with
jobs.
well, not really. That's why I'm focusing on the people. Is what do you do next? Focus on the future.
Right.
Someone's going to figure it out, and if someone doesn't figure it out, someone's going to debunk it. Someone's going to, someone is going to give you both sides of that. When you're working with your people, that's what matters, because I wouldn't be here if these people didn't report to me. If these people didn't spend just as much time with me as I spent with them, I wouldn't have any information to talk about, to theorize, to hypothesize about. I'm still could be wrong, but I mean, I'm close with some group, but the groups that I'm close with are not the UFO Twitter people, who are, still right in their own, tackling the same beast from a different side. But I'd like to see that same effort focused on the people, but there's a need for that too.
Yeah.
Right. It's no good, or there's no bad investigations in towards the subject, whether it's ufology or any science on anything. We have a tremendous amount of people that are dedicating their time and resources, yourselves included, to keep the narrative going, and that needs to be recognized. With the Experiential Support Association too, we also help, we sell memberships and things like that too, but we also help try to take good programs and make them better. There's another Masonic kind of intuition, right? Like we're trying to also build this network where it's not just Canadian, but it's American too. So I'm focusing on Canada. I'm doing Canadian topics. I could be in the US game as well. But what about Canada? These are our people, right? So, and I kind of feel that if we have this network of different countries that come together on the citizen side and we can compare notes, we can come to these answers too. Like we got to work together, but we're all like Wachowski's doing his thing, Cameron's doing his thing, Otis is the journalist, he's doing his thing. But in the end, we're all working on that same article. We're all pushing the same thing to get an answer. And if Transport Canada is going to say nothing, then I suspect the House of Commons is also going to say nothing. And then for me, that's it. But there's going to still, this UFO Twitter community is not going to accept that. There's no belief. You still have to trust the government with something. All right, I'll kind of leave it on that in terms of like, sure, the government could lie and the government has lied and the government's made mistakes and can make mistakes, but what can we trust the government with? So if these extraterrestrials exist or if these crafts exist, we can trust that they were able to keep it under wraps and protect us from it. We can trust that every time our aircrafts in Canada come across them, they're not threatened by them, they're not getting killed by them, we're not being blown up by them. So something is going on, they're aware of it, so we can trust. And even though we don't know the source of it, we can trust that it's handled. And we can trust that the government is protecting us because that's their job. And we don't need to know everything on how everything works. We want to know because we just are trying to understand why we are feeling the way that we're feeling. And if we work more on ourselves and we focus on the things that bug us and spread more love than negative energy, then we'll stop. We don't need to ask those questions anymore. We're happy, and then we just be, and then we evolve. So I trust that no matter what side, where we get this information from the government, whether they cover it up, or like cover it up, I mean, close it so that way no more information can come out, or they tell us a little bit, it's taken in consideration for the betterment of the entire world, and majority of the people that need that message will hear it. Well, and if they decide not to tell us anything, then that could also be the truth. But if you believe it to be them still covering it up, then trust that majority of the world is not ready to handle it, and help me and others get the world ready to accept it in the future.
Right. And we are trying hard on this podcast, trying to have people like yourselves that are talking about this, that are helping people out. Again, Louis, do you have any questions for our guest before we close?
No, I will just extend a very warm thanks to Ryan Stacy. It's nice to have a big mind on this type of thing and sort of be that middle ground between the polarized ufologists, mysticism, paranormal. They all intersect. They're like three circles, but there's an overlap in between each of those tri-quadrant sort of things, right? So,
and these communities have challenges working with each other.
For sure.
And I understand those challenges. Like the flat earth movement, those people drive a lot of people crazy because of the idea, the possibility. And there's a lot of evidence out there that we can't prove one way or another, but it's a different belief and it's just as equal as us fighting this other topic. So if you look at them as human beings, they're fighting for a similar cause, but they can't talk to each other. And what I understand with talking to that community is, I'll tell you that I learned more about how possible and probable that the original moon landing might have been a hoax, not from a ufologist, but from someone who believes the earth is flat, because they're also trying to prove that NASA is lying. So that common effort helps kind of narrow down where to get the information from. So not only do I have to understand how all this stuff works, I need to understand what all these communities are fighting for, and understand whether or not the effort, what it all comes down to. And what it all comes down to is that belief that what we're told and what we're experiencing doesn't match up. And we need to understand why what we see and what we feel and what we're understanding isn't what we're told. Because we're smart enough to know that, things don't make sense. I'm just talking in general terms. So it's also connecting the academic communities and all these other different factions to kind of reprogram their thoughts on how everyone is everyone, like all man on deck, or every man on deck kind of scenario.
And we need that. It's a global effort at this point to get this solved. Ryan, where can people find? We already talked about the website, but let's say it again. Where can people find you and your work? And if somebody is an experiencer, where can they go?
Yeah, so experiencersupport.org is the main site. You can find everything there. Facebook, search Ryan Stacy on that, and Twitter. I do have a podcast called Beyond the Tinfoil Hat, which is every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And I just do live interviews with people off the cuff and kind of get into it from that. And I also do another program called Uncharted Case Files every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, where I talk about the latest declassified document that I've found, what I think it means, add it to the timeline and all these other things. And yeah, I think that's pretty well it. Everything else is there.
Perfect. Ryan Stacy, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge, and for coming on the podcast today. We really do appreciate it. And let's not make this the only second time you're on. Let's have you on again, okay?
Sounds good.